The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
I looked to my background, what could I, tell a story about? And of course, when I think of storytelling, I think about my grandmother. So I, thought of the different memories we had, what could be made into a funny story. And the one thing I recalled was that when I was small, really small, like 10 years ago, my cousins and I, we were all visiting India. And during this time, basically, it's India, right? It was monsoon season then. So it was raining, it was pouring outside, and so we couldn't go outside and play cricket or anything. So my grandmother came and she said, okay, today you have the option, right? Do you want to play a game or do you want me to tell you a story? So we all wanted to play a game, right? Because we were interested in cricket. So she, decided to play a game with us. And she said, okay, come close and tell me the biggest lie you can think of. And so, we were all shocked. Our parents had told us, never to lie. And here our grandmother was promoting it. So it was like the first time I had challenged authority. So it was memorable in my mind. And so, we all came up with creative lies. My cousins, they told lies about dinosaurs and how they rode it all around town. One got a magical cape that made him invisible. I told a lie about how I became a millionaire on the plane ride over. Just simple things like that. And so after that, our grandmother said, excellent job. Since you all told wonderful lies, here is a bowl full of sugar cubes. And, as a child, we loved sugar cubes because they were literally our fuel. We just popped them in and we were ready to go. And so we just took handfuls and we just ate them. But after a second or two, we realized they weren't sugar cubes. And so we got a little annoyed and we asked our grandmother, these taste yucky, what is it? And she said, oh, now let me teach you a lesson. And she had us come in closer and she said, these are not actually sugar cubes. They're salt cubes. Because they look similar. They look right like each other. So she had tricked us in order to explain to us why we shouldn't lie. That when you lie, you can never be sure what's the truth and what is not. And when you lie, people around you, they lose their trust in you. So she wanted to teach us this lesson, so she played the game with us. And, right after that, she said, okay, I'll make it up to you. And she told us a story. So we got the best of both worlds.
Yes, wonderful.
And basically that was a particular memorable event from my childhood, because nothing like that had ever happened before.
Sure.
And so I decided, to make a story on that. I could definitely add humor in there for the lies and really bring out the essence of my grandmother, make it maybe as a tribute because of everything she's done.
Sure.
So it worked out well, and I auditioned with that story this year.
This is one of the stories I've been telling the longest. I've been telling since 95. So this is one, I heard one version of up at Cafe Lena, the story crafters, Jerry Burns and Barry Marshall from Philmont, New York, which is mid-Hudson region. Yeah. They were up there and they told a version of this story. I found a couple of others, and then I've, as storytellers usually do, crafted my own with bits and pieces from all of those. Once there was a man named Sean Kiley who lived in a little cottage in Ireland with his wife, his father, and his blind mother. They were very poor. They didn't have any tablecloths at all. No. And one fall, their harvest was very poor. So every morning that winter, just before dawn, Sean Kiley would go out hunting, hoping to shoot some animal, maybe even a squirrel would be welcomed in their stew pot to complement the potatoes and turnips. Well, one morning, Sean Kiley was out in that early light before dawn and was crossing a harvested field and saw something white out of the corner of his eyes over by the edge of the woods. And he turned thinking, oh, it's probably some animal grazing on the harvested stubble. I often see animals like that, but this one's white and it's very large. I wonder what it could be. So Sean Kiley started very quietly walking towards that large white animal. And then he stopped because he was close enough to recognize what it was. It was a huge white stag, a huge male deer with an enormous rack of antlers. Oh, Sean Kiley stopped, and this was a magnificent creature, and the beauty of it filled him. But then he remembered his family's hunger, and he started looking at it like food. The meat on that creature's bones, it could feed my family for weeks. So reluctantly, he started now stalking that animal, only moving when its head was eating the stubble, turned away from him, and freezing when the animal's head was anywhere in his direction. Finally, he was close enough to shoot the white stag. He raised his gun, and again, the beauty of that creature filled Sean Kiley, and he just admired it. And then he remembered the hunger of his family and raised his gun again. And at that exact moment, the white stag raised its head, and their eyes met, looking into each other's eyes. And then the white stag spoke. "Sean Kiley, if you will spare my life, I will grant you one wish." Well, Sean Kiley thought very quickly, whoa, this is a white stag. They're very rare, and it speaks, and it knows my name. Oh, it truly must be a magical creature. It could grant me one wish. Yes, I will gladly spare your life for one wish, because I belong to a family who needs at least one wish to help it. For my one wish, it's very hard to pick just one wish, the white stag said. "Sean Kiley, I will give you till tomorrow morning at this time to decide on your one wish. Meet me here tomorrow." And then the white stag turned and strode off into the woods. All thought of shooting any animal had completely left Sean Kiley's mind. He just headed home thinking, well, what should my one wish be? But by the time he got home, he was no closer to an answer than he had been when the stag had given him the opportunity. So Sean told his family what had happened. Then he turned to his father and said, "Father, if you had one wish, what would it be?" "Oh, Sean, if I had one wish, well, you know we had a poor harvest this year, and part of that was because I wasn't strong. I'm not as strong as I used to be, nor as steady on my feet, so I wasn't able to plant as much, and if I had one wish, it would be for a lot of gold, because with a lot of gold, we'd never be hungry again." "Thank you, Father. That's a good wish." And then Sean turned to his blind mother and said, "Mother, if you had one wish, what would it be?" "Oh, Sean, if I had one wish, well, if the wish was just for myself, you know, I've always wanted to see the faces of my loved ones. So if I had one wish, it would be for my sight." "Oh, that's a good wish, Mother, thank you." And then Sean turned to his wife and said, "Wife, what would your one wish be?" "Sean, you've known what my one wish has been ever since we were married. You remember our 2 children, the wee ones, both of whom died before their first birthdays. My one wish has always been for a healthy child." "Ah, wife, yes, I know that's your wish." So it was very quiet around the Kiley cottage that afternoon, and when they sat down for their supper, to their watered down stew, that was all they had been able to put in it that day, extra, just some more water. They weren't talking much, but all of a sudden Sean got a smile on his face, and he went to bed that night and fell asleep as if he was a man who had absolutely nothing on his mind. It seemed as if he had decided on his one wish, but he didn't tell anyone. But did he decide on his father's wish for the gold, or his mother's wish for her sight, or maybe he decided on his wife's wish for a healthy child? But that next morning he was up while it was still dark, and he had been waiting for quite a while at that spot at the edge of the woods when the white stag strode out. "Well, Sean Kiley, have you decided on your one wish?" "That I have. My one wish is for my mother to see my healthy child rocking in its cradle made of gold."
Dude.
Zelda. As I stood there, looking at the outhouse, leaning at a precarious angle, and the rusted hand pump by the kitchen door, I wondered why I had come to my uncle's house. He had died not long ago, and ever since the funeral, my father had been unable to enter the house where he had grown up with his brother and his 2 sisters. So I had come maybe to clean the house up and get it ready for sale, but maybe to settle. I really wasn't sure. Now, empty houses are usually still as death, but when I opened that front door, I was met with a distinct impression of voices recently hushed. And though the passageway down the hall was blocked by great big curling sheets of Victorian wallpaper that were peeling off the wall, it seemed as if somebody had recently passed from one room to the next. And the Victorian lace curtains, now stiff and yellow with age, had been pushed to the side as if someone had just been standing there looking out the window. The house is bisected by this hallway with the front door on one end and the back door on the other. So I made my way gingerly down the hall past the wallpaper to open the doors to air it out because it was so dusty. It looked like my uncle had not cleaned it in years. But the door seemed to be locked and there was no key in the hole. Next to that door was the door to my uncle's study, which I knew because I had been there when he was alive. And when I pressed that door open, I was met with piles of paper, newspaper clippings, pictures, letters, just covering every surface and spilling onto the floor. And gleaming over the dusty boxes was a pair of eyes that I recognized was the portrait of my grandmother hanging off a porcelain knob. And under the cracked upright piano was a child's schoolroom slate with the name Zelda carved in the wooden frame. Zelda. Zelda. Nobody in our family was called by that name. It made me wonder. Now, in the first few days of cleaning the house, I didn't notice the effect that it had on me. At night, it whispered to itself, an ongoing hushaby of creaking floorboards and shifting timbers, a soft, sighing recantation of long-dead secrets. But many times I would be awakened from the refuge of sleep by the ruffled purr of the boiler igniting itself. But was it the boiler that had awoken me? Sometimes I would lie there listening to the sound of my breath and become frightened that the breath was not my own. And once, in the early somber blues of dawn, one sound distinguished itself from all the rest: a light footfall outside my bedroom door. By day, as I cleaned, a miscellany of noises began to follow me around the house. A little tapping here, a little knocking there. I would be washing the door in the living room and I would hear a little tapping behind it. I'd open the door, but there was nothing there. Well, that was easily explained away. I mean, you know, with the expansion and contraction of heat, of the wood and the heat and the cold, that could make that noise. But then I'd go to the kitchen and to empty the bucket of water, and I'd hear this irritated shuffling noise under the kitchen table. It started to make me edgy. I was constantly jumping and turning around with pounding heart. By day, as I cleaned, I told myself that habit is a blind and powerful force, that objects could have a memory of sorts. The stairs were used to being walked on, so they creaked. The living room was used to being lived in, so it rustled. But at night, my dreams grew troubled. In them, windows flew open and slammed shut with a fury I didn't know my mind could possess. My cleaning grew more intent and almost obsessive. I opened up the windows in my uncle's study to air it out, but I couldn't stop myself from looking at the portrait of my grandmother. My eyes always seemed to be drawn there. Even from the other room, my eyes would be drawn back to that portrait. And I began to notice that on sunny days, a fierce light shone in her eyes, and her face looked stern. But on cloudy days, the dogmatism turned to desperation, and those stern lines looked more like those of suffering. I wondered what she had guarded and what she had lost. I thought I'd ask my father if he ever called. I'd left several messages for him, but he wasn't very good at answering machines. The leaves began to fall, and I began to mislay things. I found my comb in the refrigerator. You could chalk that up to multitasking, I suppose. But how do you explain the jump rope that I found tied to the porcelain knob of the outhouse door that was definitely not there before? One day, after a rain, a red India rubber ball materialized in a puddle in the front lane. And one day, I found my glasses hanging off a low branch. One night I was doing the crossword puzzles in the living room, and someone tugged my hair. When I turned back to pick up my pencil, I couldn't find it anywhere. Winter came, white and bitterly cold. Whenever I stepped outside, the wind tore at my face. There was a rainstorm that froze into black ice that coated all the branches, and when the wind blew, they would clack on the windows like angry bones. It was dark in the house, and the face of my grandmother suffered in all that darkness. It looked to me like the muscles around her eyes were frozen, and like she was straining against the tight collar of her dress, like she was gritting her teeth behind her pressed lips, as if she was fighting to hold something back. And the little noises steadily grew louder and more violent. I found a doll with bite marks in the arm that definitely were not there before. The leg of my favorite chair one day caved in and the whole thing thudded to one side. Again, I tried to explain that away. It was old furniture. It wasn't used to this new activity. But one day, the mirror on my grandmother's vanity suddenly slammed backwards into the wall. And one morning, I was wounded to find my favorite bowl smashed. And what was worse, it was smashed with such force that it was nothing but colored sand. I began to wake exhausted by dreams, but I couldn't remember them as anything but these dark shapes that hung over me for the better part of the day. Finally, I rescued one image. It was the image of a young girl, maybe 4, maybe 5, with wavy blonde hair and gray eyes. But she was running outside in the snow with bare feet. Her coat was unbuttoned and the dress trailed out. And I called to her and she turned around and looked at me, but she wouldn't come, and her brow was furrowed in anger. I brooded on her face all day long. That night I sat in the living room with a blanket wrapped around my legs because it was so cold. The wind was whipping up around the edge of the house, making high bottle notes on the lip of the chimney. I kept stirring the fire, but it seemed more like it was sucking the warmth out of the room rather than warming it up. All of a sudden, I noticed that the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. I'd heard something. Mama! Something other than the wind. It was a small, high voice at the back door. Mama! Mama! Let me in! I stopped breathing to hear it better. The voice went on, so sad, so persistent. Suddenly, I stood up. I knew it was Zelda. She was here. What should I do? Should I let her in? What if she was angry? What if she wanted revenge? What could I do to help her? But the voice went on, so persistent, so sad, just calling, Mama, Mama, Mommy, let me in. Not angry at all, just confused. Suddenly, I understood the expression on my grandmother's face. She had always heard that voice, and her insides ripped to get to it. I became speed itself. I picked up the poker, and I threw myself at the door, and I wrenched at it. I jammed the poker around the edge to see if I could lever it open, but I couldn't open the door. I threw down the poker, and I ran out of the front of the house and all the way around to the back. And there, up against the back door, was nothing but a snowdrift that the wind had blown up. And the wind was gone, and the voice had stopped. And I stood there, empty. If it would have helped, I would have picked the very snow up in my arms, and perhaps it would have helped me. The house is quiet after that. Not a timber stirred. Silence saturated the woodwork, numbing all fear and pain. And the silence was worse to me than all the scary noises I had ever heard. And I recognized the silence. It was the silence of my father. Dad, I finally got him on the phone. Who's Zelda? There was a sudden absence on the other end of the line, almost as if he'd hung up, a tiny void. And then he spoke hazily. Oh, haven't I ever told you about... Zelda was his youngest sister. She was too young to go to school with all the other kids, so she stayed home every day with her mother while my grandmother was trying to get her work done. And one day, she must have been pestering the life out of my grandmother, and so my grandmother bundled her up and sent her out into the snow and the fresh air to play, because it was good for her lungs. And then she got back to whatever it was she was doing. But she lost track of time. Hours passed, and she forgot all about Zelda. When she remembered, she ran outside in a panic. Zelda! Zelda! But no one answered. She looked down in the snow, and she found her footsteps, and she followed them, and they led her all over to the jump rope, to the red India rubber ball, and all the way around to the back of the house, where there she was, lying in a tiny weeping heap up against the back door, shaken and blue with cold. You see, she was too young to understand that that was the back door, not the front door, and that they never used that door. It had been nailed shut. There was furniture in front of it, and that nobody would even think to listen for a child at that door. She got chilled and caught a cold, and the cold turned to pneumonia, and she died. And my grandmother took to her bed in grief and stayed there for a long time. How long? I asked my father. I don't know, he said. And I could imagine him and his brother standing by their mother's bedside in some mute eternity, waiting for her to rise. And then my grandmother says that she had a vision, that Jesus Christ appeared to her at the foot of her bed, floating in midair, his eyes glittering on either side of his nose, of his hawkish nose, and his bare toes splayed from so much barefoot walking. And he held his arms out to her and he said, "You are saved." And that's what gave my grandmother the strength to rise from her bed and go on with her life. You see, my father said, she was afraid. She thought she was going to hell for sure for what she had done, and she didn't mind the idea of punishment. She felt she deserved it, but what she couldn't bear was the thought that if she went to hell, she would never see her baby girl again. So when Christ said that she was saved, she rejoiced because she knew she'd meet her again. The house stayed quiet all through January and February, and I don't know why I didn't pick up and move. I was just kind of suspended in limbo. But the seasons change as they always do, and with the softening of the cold, the little voices, the little sounds returned. I could have cried with relief, because even though I knew how strange it was to make a place at the table for the spirit of loss, I welcomed her in. I relished the little noises that followed me around the house. I laughed at looking at things that I knew I hadn't mislaid. I hugged the doll with a bitten arm because, you see, the haunting of Zelda answered something in me that I had never known was a question.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round,